Hi, Calvary family. I am Dan Worthman. I'm the transition pastor at Calvary, and I'm joined by Kyle Satterblum, the chairman of the leadership board of Calvary. We want to give you a briefing on where Calvary stands with some of the recent developments of COVID-19 in our community. I want to begin by bringing you back to what we shared with you early this spring as we were first making decisions as a church based upon the restrictions that were being imposed upon us by COVID. At the time, we sat down as a leadership board and I asked us to come up with a set of values. We needed to make sure that all of our decisions, rather than just being reactively driven, were based upon a consistent set of values. So I'm going to show you right now, just very briefly, I want to go through what those values are. The first value that we have is that we value the safety and security of our Calvary Church body, particularly the vulnerable. So this is something that's preeminent in all of our decisions. The second value is that we value honoring government mandates and recommendations, specifically those that are based upon data, those that are intended for our good, and those that don't ask us to violate scripture. So there certainly is a need for church leadership discernment as we consider government mandates and recommendations. The third one is we value keeping our congregation connected with each other, which has been very challenging to do, but I think God has taught us a lot about that as we have gone through this season. The fourth value is that we value recognizing and building upon the unique blessings and opportunities that God has provided to us, or we believe God is providing to us in this pandemic. And He is stretching us, and that is for our good. And He is showing us what is important and what needs to be emphasized. And that's all good. And so we value that. And the final value is we value our staff and our volunteers. And we want to ensure that the burdens that are placed on them by the challenges of this pandemic are manageable and sustainable. So those are the values that we developed. Kyle, you want to share a little bit about how you've seen those influence our decision making?
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth repeating just that, we developed these earlier this year, but we've really tried to keep these values, these 5 values in particular, in mind to help guide our decision making over the subsequent months. We might not have overtly mentioned them as much since this spring, but they are, what we as the board and the pastors have used to guide our decision making. So while there's been, some changes in, the pandemic and the different restrictions, those values haven't changed and won't change as we continue to head forward.
Good. Most recently, as you are probably well aware, there has been a surge in what's been happening with COVID in our community. And seeing that surge coming, we have been for a number of weeks now, we have been working on the development of what we're calling circuit breakers. And I want you to think for a minute about what a circuit breaker is. A circuit breaker in your home or in a building is something that helps make sure that if there's an electrical surge, it doesn't become a life-threatening crisis. So it cuts out when there is a surge to make sure that that doesn't become a situation where there can be a fire or something like that. Similarly, we have sought to, as Calvary's leadership, to determine some circuit breakers. We've developed 3 of them that are needed to make sure that any surges in COVID-19 don't become a life-threatening crisis for our church. And Kyle, why don't you kind of walk us through what those 3 circuit breakers are?
Yeah, thanks, Pastor Dan. Yeah, so our first circuit breaker, as you can see here, we titled just government mandates, specifically that any relevant governmental mandates limiting the size of our meetings, Calvary is going to respond or suspend gatherings of the corresponding size for a total of 4 weeks, or for at least 4 weeks. And during that 4 weeks, we're going to continue to reassess the situation. So while we kind of have that, if this circuit breaker trips, for 4 weeks, we're going to suspend those meetings. This isn't a guarantee that at the end of 4 weeks, anything specific happens. We're going to reassess as we go along and decide kind of at the end of those 4 weeks how we proceed.
But it is possible that a different decision could be made at the end of the 4 weeks, even if the government mandate doesn't change. That's at least a possible under this one.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah. And then can you comment on how we're trying to match the corresponding size of any mandate?
Yeah. So, throughout this process, there's been, different wording from, just think of the state limitations on, group size, gathering size. And so what we try and take into account is that, not all groups at Calvary are the same size. Certainly our worship service is one size, small groups are another. Wednesday night activities are another. And so if the wording of any specific mandates, again, whether state, local, countywide, indicates a specific group size, we're going to try and take that into account. And then similarly sized groups at Calvary will be suspended if they're just over that number. Whereas any groups that we feel are under that number, we'll try to continue to have to meet as much as possible.
Okay. And before I go on to the second circuit breaker, is it that all three of these circuit breakers would have to be tripped before we do something, or that if any of them are tripped?
Yeah, so that's a good clarification. And we do view these as independent of each other. So if one trips, that's when we'll do or take the corresponding action. There could be a situation where all three trip or there are two of them are. But we're going to try and take into account that if any one of these is tripped, then the action is going to be taken.
Okay, here's the second.
Yeah, so the second we titled COVID-19 spread in Calvary. And that's if there is evidence of COVID-19 spread from one household unit to another at or during an event at Calvary, we will then suspend large group worship settings. So think specifically Sunday morning worship, Wednesday night youth worship for a total or for 2 weeks. Then similar to the previous one, during those 2 weeks, we're going to plan to reassess the situation and see, is that something that needs to continue? Is it something where we feel like similar to a quarantine type of situation, the risk of additional cases occurring are low enough that we can resume those worship services.
Yeah, this one raises a couple of questions. How will a spread be determined?
Yeah, so this really does depend on how our body self-reports to Calvary leadership. So just as we have talked about from the beginning, it is something that we would encourage you to, if you believe that an exposure occurred and a positive test came from, being at a Calvary activity, or just if you test positive after having come to a Calvary activity, we would ask that you let us know. Again, that's what we would encourage, and then we'll use the best information or the information that we have to make the best decision we can, whether or not this circuit breaker has been tripped.
And then another question some may have is the time period is different here. Rather than 4 weeks for the first circuit breaker, it's 2 weeks. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so we had talked when you consider what's happened in in some individual schools or other settings where a case occurs, and once you've been exposed, the current recommendations are that you self-quarantine for 2 weeks after the last date of your exposure. So thinking along the same lines, if there is say a positive case from our worship service on Sunday morning, then to ensure that anyone that might have been exposed at that, kind of has that chance to self-quarantine, or it's essentially our groups undergoing a group quarantine, so to speak, and using that 2-week limit because that's what's been used by the officials and recommendations from the medical professionals after an exposure. So we did feel like that was one we could potentially come back sooner, again, if it's just an exposure at Calvary. So wanted to kind of take that into consideration and not be overly cautious or exceeding what the health professionals would recommend.
Okay. And here's a third one.
Yeah, so our third one has to do with public school precautions. So specifically, if the Rochester Public Schools move all K through 12 students district-wide to an entirely distance learning module, Calvary will suspend large group worship settings again on Sundays and Wednesdays for 4 weeks. And then similar to the previous two, during those 4 weeks, the situation will be reassessed. And this, just kind of, again, leading into the next slide, it does, um, you know, uh, earlier this week, if I'll start with that, you may have seen there was an announcement from RPS that as of Wednesday this coming week on the 18th, they are going to suspend in-person in-person offerings and move to a full distance module. And they did put a time limit on from their perspective, but it's going to start on this Wednesday. So, again, like Pastor Dan said, this is, these circuit breakers are something we've been working on for a number of weeks. And, it just happens that before we're really kind of announcing it to the group, we do feel like this one has been tripped. So corresponding to that, as we move forward, after this Sunday, the 15th, starting the following week on the 22nd, we are going to suspend our in-person worship services on Sunday morning and Wednesday for the next 4 weeks. We're going to take into account how the situation looks over the next 4 weeks. And obviously we'll be in communication with the body as we move forward too. But starting after that date and on that Wednesday, we're going to move to an all live streamed Sunday morning worship. We'll figure out there's going to be one service, but it will be a live stream service similar to if you're watching from home currently on Sundays. It'll be a very similar format. We're going to, again, continue, if this is the only circuit breaker that's tripped, continue to try and meet with smaller groups if possible, but the larger group worship services on Wednesday will be suspended as well. We will try and continue with the live nativity as scheduled. And then, as we said before, decisions moving forward as we reassess the situation over the next 4 weeks, we'll kind of see how we proceed after that time frame.
Yeah, and I could just add, our desire would have been to put out this announcement with these circuit breakers prior to one of these circuit breakers being tripped. We had been talking about these for weeks. We were working on developing consensus for final wording. We had just finalized it the night before the circuit breaker actually was tripped, not knowing that that was coming. So we wish our timing could have been different in getting this information out to you, but it is what it is. And just a couple clarifying points that I would make as well. We want to still present to you a live worship service. So that's why we're going to, as long as we can, live stream the service. We're working on ways to make that even more interactive and engaging. And you'll be hearing some more about that. We'll announce the time that service is going to be next week, so that and can plan accordingly. As Kyle said, yeah, for the time being, until we get more information, other groups other than the worship services on Sunday and Wednesday night will continue to meet. And yeah, we will be continuing to reassess this decision. So Kyle, any thought on why we follow the Rochester Public Schools? Why is that even a circuit breaker for the board?
Yeah, so one thing we know that RPS is looking at is the daily incidence of new cases in Olmsted County and Rochester. They're taking that into consideration when they're making that decision to move to an all distance learning module. So for reference, kind of the marker that the state set forth, and I believe RPS is using, as well as 50 new cases per day per 100,000 population. So they kind of use that marker, and there's a little bit of a lag time in what's reported and how the numbers work, but they do feel like obviously we've passed that number. And then if you look at the Olmsted County data, actually earlier this week, what they reported was an incidence of 88 new cases per day per 100,000. So we're well past that mark, and feel like that's that's a place for us to kind of fall in line a little bit and realize that where it's kind of tough to tell like what's the best number to use. We felt like this is a good starting point and a good point of reference. And again, trying to follow along with that at least for the next 4 weeks, and then we see how things go. RPS from a school calendar standpoint, it makes a whole lot of sense coming up to the holiday season that would we rush back before Christmas. Calvary can be a little bit more agile. We don't go on a Christmas break for 2 or 3 weeks. So maybe there's a chance that we can reconvene and have our Sunday morning worship or Wednesday evening worship for the youth sooner than the date that RPS uses. But that's why we kind of built in that 4 weeks, and let's take a look at how things are at that point.
Okay. Last thing we want to share today is some implications for small groups. So some of you may be aware that small groups, that there's been an executive order issued this week, Executive Order 2096 by Governor Walz. We have analyzed that thoroughly, and I have sent, if you are a small group leader, I sent out today, November 14th, I sent out to you an email with that analysis so you can get more detail on this. But for everyone right here, here's just the recommendations for small groups. We do not believe that order directly applies, but it has some implications for us. So here are our recommendations. We at Calvary, we want to continue for the groups, those of you who are in groups who desire to meet virtually. You've already made that decision or you're making that decision presently. We have free Zoom accounts. We'll support you in the use of those. So as you desire, we'll make those available and support you to use those so you can continue if you want to meet virtually. There are other small groups who may make the decision that you desire to continue meeting in person. We are encouraging you that you move your group into Calvary's building, that you work with us to schedule your group to meet on a day and time that works for you and that we have space available. That's just an encouragement. That's not a mandate, but we're encouraging you to do that because we believe as you meet in Calvary's building, we can support you in various ways to lower the risk of in-person meetings. There's still some risk. There is always some risk, but this is a way that we think we can help you lower that risk. So again, if you're a small group leader, you've already gotten more guidance from me by an email, and you can call and talk to the church office if you want to find out more than that. So that's the information we want to present to you today. Any closing thoughts, Kyle?
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, we're kind of tossing a lot of information out there, and in this setting, not easy to obviously ask questions immediately, but we know there's going to be questions or clarifications that need to occur too. So just would invite you to contact us. Feel free to send me an email, to send an email to the board, to Pastor Dan. We'd be happy to interact with you, help make any clarifications that we can, answer any questions as best we can. Because we want to be as transparent and open with our communication as we can be.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time and watching this video. And we continue to look to the Lord to lead us through this season and even to show us again the unique opportunities that He is opening to us if we have eyes to see them and the faith to pursue them. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, guys.